Hello, my name is Dan Humberg. I represent HarvestFires.com. This is an instructional video on how to install the tin set on a combine. In this case, the combine is the John Deere 9770 model. We're going to show you how to install the tin on the engine around the exhaust manifold, the turbocharger, and the first part of the exhaust pipe. Before I begin doing that, I always give this cautionary statement. This kit is a Firestop kit, and it's very effective at stopping the ignition of organic dusts on the turbocharger and the hot components of the exhaust system. However, I cannot guarantee that you'll never have a fire on your combine. There are too many other sources of ignition. You can have an electrical short, you can have a hot bearing, you can have a variety of things that can occur to cause a smolder on your combine. But this does generally stop the chronic fires, particularly in volatile crops like sunflowers, that occur and that begin at the exhaust system. So you still need to be vigilant on your combine even if you have this kit on there, but we hope it will greatly reduce the incidence of smolders and fires on your combine. Okay, having said that, I want to talk about the setup here that we have to do before we can actually put the tin on. You're looking down on the engine of the 9770. The sparrows have been here before me, so there's lots of little white stuff all over the place, but that won't bother this installation. I've taken off the step, the service platform step here that is right above the engine. You need that to be able to access the top of the engine here. I've also taken off the sheet metal that goes back here between the engine and the grain tank. There's a piece here with a kind of a mailbox cut out for a step. We've taken that off temporarily, and the pieces over to the left by the radiator we've taken off so that we have access to the engine. We'll put all of that back on when we're finished with the installation. So those are all, every one of those are 13 millimeter, 8 millimeter bolts use a 13 millimeter socket. So if you're going up there to take that off, that's the only wrenches that you should need to take that stuff apart. So we take that off, we've got access to the engine. I'm not going to show you in this video how to fold the tin. That's a separate video that'll show you how to bend up the sets of tin from flat stock that I gave you as part of the kit. So we'll start the process of installing the tin now. The pieces are numbered. This one is 70 for John Deere 9770, and 001 means it's the first part. I've also gone ahead and done something on the head of the engine here on this side. There are a series of little brackets, Z-shaped or L-shaped brackets that are all there just to hold the wiring harness. One here, one here, one here, and I've got one back here. And all of those I pulled, again, they're 8 millimeter bolts with 13 millimeter sockets. I pulled those short bolts out for now to have access. As soon as we get this part installed, we can put those bolts back in. So this is part number one. It has a couple of flanges on the front edge, and I'm going to try and install that here or slip it in place if I can. Now we'll see whether I'm able to do that. You have to lift the wiring harness up and slide this underneath, and then rotate it around. So that we have the round part back here in this corner near the, looks like the air conditioner compressor to me. And then it will slide forward, and there's a rectangular cutout in here that will slide around the exhaust gas valve. And we slide this piece forward as far as we can. It'll come out. That may be as far as it goes, but I think that's the right spot for it. There it is. And now I'm going to grab a 13 millimeter bolt. This first piece slid in place. Notice the back edge of it follows the line on the top of the valve cover here pretty closely, and there's a couple of those these holes that are exposed, these slots cover those threaded holes in the valve cover. Now I can take one of the 8mm bolts that we pulled out of there, and I'll slide that, put this bracket that holds the wiring harness, and thread him back in there. Okay, I'm not going to take your time to show you putting all those back in, but once this is in place, I can put another one back here, and these back two ones that I loosened to be able to slide that in there, I'll put those all back in place. Okay, we're back. You're looking over my shoulder at the side of the engine. We have the turbocharger here, the compressor here. That first piece that we put in place here, I've bolted down, but I've left it a little bit loose in case I need to shift it just slightly to align it for the next piece. This is piece number 2, 70002. It has several cutouts and knockouts in it. One modification I found that I needed to make here, because this is an older 9770 and they don't keep them the same very often or very long. There was a fitting over here, actually part of the wiring harness, that comes down, and it interfered right here. There's already a notch here for a piece, but I ended up trimming this out with tin snips, and then I bent the surface or the edge of the steel over lightly with pliers so that it's not a rough edge, that it won't cut any of that wiring harness. Okay, we're going to bring this in from the bottom. We're going to slide it up around this wiring harness piece right here, and in place underneath the first piece, on both, a couple of points on the very end and right here. And then there's another one of these brackets that holds the wiring harness, where I pulled the 8mm bolt out, and there's a little raised boss here that has that threaded hole for that. And this slot in the tin piece will, if you lift it up, will line up with that hole for the 8mm bolt, and we're going to use that to help hold this piece in place. So I'm going to lift that up now, hopefully, and get that lined up. Put the bracket back there and put the 8mm bolt back in its hole. Probably easier said than done. There it goes. We can spin that in, and eventually we'll tighten that in to hold this piece in place. Can you give me the drill driver and for screws? I've got a number 2 square drive bit in my drill driver, and there are pilot holes here on piece number 1 that line up with the hole on piece number 2. I'm going to put a screw in there. And we've got that put together, or at least start to held together. I've got another one here that I can do. And there's one on the end over here, but we may tie that into a third piece in a little bit. I've got I think I can put one in this hole here. Should be able to. Yeah, we got a couple in there now. So that's piece number 2. Let's look around for piece number 3. Okay, I've got another piece. This one's marked piece number 3003. This one has a keyhole here that didn't get cut through by the laser this time. That was a mistake on the part of the settings for that laser. Ordinarily, I would punch that keyhole down a little bit. If you're looking, this is going to be the inside surface of the thing, then this is the bottom of the box, or part of the bottom of the box. There's a flange on the end that's bent up and a flange on the outer face that's bent down, and I would push that keyhole down. I can't right now because it's not cut through. I don't know that that'll be a problem on this installation, but I normally would do that to allow some air to flow out at that location under the left-hand end of the manifold. So we're going to try and fit this one in place. Okay, we're back here with part number 3. I have some cutouts in this end of this that were laser cut. This one fits, outer one here, it's going to slide in from the left-hand end under the manifold. You actually have the exhaust manifold, and then you have the it's a exhaust gas cooling jacket outside of that, and so that's going to be right over the top of that, and this is part of that exhaust gas cooling jacket arrangement here. This cutout is actually for the return line from the turbocharger bearing. There's a tube or a pipe that's going to drop down that has to go through there, so we slide this in from one end. Now this back edge is doesn't have any flange or anything, it's just the edge of the tin, and there's a kind of a slot or a thin space between the engine block and the head, and this whole thing will kind of follow in that slot when you slide it in there, and you'll have to fuss around with it for a while. I just had to do it here to fit it in, test fit it in there, but if you get it to slide in that slot, it'll follow along, and the outer flange of this will drop down or be just inside the piece that we got hanging here already. And so if all works well, we slide it in place, and the holes in the bottom of that will eventually line up with the holes in this flange, and we can put that on. The back end will be restrained by that slot that it sits in. Can't go up, can't go down, and we should be able to fit around this oil bearing or this oil return line here. I'll try that in just a minute. Okay, one more thing I want to show you before I try and slide this piece in place is that there are little fingers cut by the laser around this hole where the oil line goes through. I take a pliers and I bend those down 90 degrees so that we have a face of steel, not an edge of steel that could potentially touch that line. I don't want anything that would abrade or cut that line. And so I've taken a pliers, I've got a parallel draw pliers here, and grip those things and bend them down pretty much a full 90 degrees so that the face of those pedals is now potentially touching that line and not the edge. The laser doesn't leave the edge real sharp, but it's very rough, and it's hard, so I don't want anything there that would cut that line. So let's try and slide this piece in place and see if we can't get it where we can attach it. Okay, you may have to look underneath there with a flashlight to see where you're going with it, but I've got it slid back into that place, and I've made the left-hand end flush with the end of this vertical piece, and if I bring it up in here in place, I actually have screw holes that line up here with the outer flange on that piece, and so I'm going to shoot some screws in there if I can find my drill driver. Okay, I got two in with the drill driver. The next one doesn't have enough space to get the drill driver in there. You might be able to do it with a longer bit. Otherwise, I've got it in the kit with you. You'll have a little stubby screwdriver that's about the size of a silver dollar and a half-inch thick that's got a bit. And you could slip that in there and put that next screw in. This is that stubby screwdriver I was talking about. It'll fit in the palm of your hand. Anyway, there are a few places where that's about the only way you can get the screw in, is if you're reaching up underneath or something. You don't have room for the handle on a drill driver or a hand screwdriver. You can put this in the palm of your hand and screw one in. There's number 2 square out of there, so it'll hold these screws. So that's the driver you may need to put in some of these. The next part I'm going to work on or try is part number 4. It's got some unique bends to it, because it has to fit into a space. It also has a flower petal hole here that's going to go around a coolant line that comes out of the end of the radiator end of the engine. And again, we've got these flower petals, and I'm going to bend those petals outward so that they fit close to the line, but hopefully give a little bit of clearance around it. And again, we want to bend the face of these cuts away from the thing or parallel to the line so that we don't have anything that could abrade or cut that. So I'll go off camera and bend that and show it to you when I've got it bent up, and then we'll see if we can fit it in place. Alright, I'm back to piece number 4 here. and this piece is very difficult to get in place. There is no way to put it on other than to bend it rather severely and to fit it around that water line that comes out of there, or that coolant line. You just have to kind of twist it open to be able to slip it around there. And at the same time, there's a, let's pick you up and move you over here a bit. There is a electric sensor here that plugs in here, and if you squeeze this, I think if you squeeze this tab on the bottom of it up tight, then you can pull it off the plug that it sits on. And you'll need to do that to get the fitting, to get this piece, because this end piece that we're trying to put in place comes up here and dips in around behind that sensor to keep that on the outside. Anyway, so you have to pull that off temporarily, and as soon as we get the piece on, we'll snap it back in place there. I hope you can see what I'm looking at. Sensor line is, or that sensor, no, I bet you can't see that very well. There's the sensor right in front of the camera coming out of the water jacket. It's probably a temperature sensor for the coolant. And we're trying to fit a piece in that notches around that. So, but you have to bend the piece to fit around this water line that comes out of the end of the PGR jacket here. And so that you just have to flat twist the thing and bend it in and fit it on there. And it will not be particularly easy, but it is possible to do it. All right, the next thing with that piece is that John Deere doesn't build two engines that are alike. They always move things around on them, and so this water line is not in the place that it was on the last one that I did an install on. And so I'm going to have to cut the pedals on this opening in the piece, extend them down about a ½ an inch or 5/8 of an inch so that we can twist it open or peel that open more so that that line can come out down here instead of up here. So we'll do that off camera, and then I'll show you the piece and then put it in place and show it in place. Alright, I've got this piece. I've trimmed this down, or at least extended those pedals farther down and opened them up quite a ways, so I should be able to get that line to go around this now, I hope. I've also trimmed off since they're longer, I've trimmed them off, and I bent the original pedals back down flat above to try to minimize the size of the hole around that tube. The other thing I'll point out is when we get done with this, we may use some of that aluminum foil tape that's part of your kit to try to seal this space up around that tube a little bit, because we've got a hole here, and this hole is facing the radiator fan, and I don't want that radiator fan to blast air and potentially dust into this and push it inside our enclosure. We would like to exclude that, and we'll push clean air in there from our system, but I don't want the radiator to be able to do that. So we'll try and seal this part up that faces the radiator fan. So I'll put that piece in place, and then I'll show you the installation. Alright, I actually got that piece in place, and I want to show it to you. That's good. Here we go. So here's the tour. We pushed that piece in place, had to twist it sideways and to get it to go around this pipe. Actually, it worked best to take the back end of it, angle it up in the kind of in there, and then twist this so we could force it around this pipe. Once back around that pipe, you can bend it again to kind of close it back up and bend it back into shape as much as possible. You could also force this dip-de-doo part here back behind where our sensor line came out. I've put the sensor wire harness back, snapped it back on there so you can see how we go around that piece. And there's a tab on the top here that, again, this got bent up a little bit, but we can unbend it, and it fits over the top of this, and we got a screw that holds it down, catches this one, the first piece, and the second piece all together here. I got a little bit of a gap here, but we'll throw a little bit of that tape on it, and that'll close that up. It's not a bad fit there. And I also put 2 screws here at top and bottom. I might be able to get one in this middle hole here, but it's pretty tight behind the compressed air line here, and I don't know that I'll get that one in. It doesn't matter. It's all tight together now. It come apart without that one screw. Also on the bottom here you can see there are 4 screws. Turns out the pilot holes would indicate that this piece should go inside the flange that's behind it, but I didn't want to try and make that happen because it's so hard to get this in place as it is. So I shot screws through here where they went, and they seem to bite into the piece behind there. Self-drilling tapping screws anyway, so I just shot those 4 through there, and we got this piece. It's tight, it's on there, it's not going anywhere, and it's not very leaky. We will plug this up a little bit with tape here around that tube, but otherwise we've got clearance around the tube, so we're not touching it with a real sharp edge, even though it looks like I got razor blades there. And we will cover that, the top part of that hole, with some tape, some aluminum foil tape, and tighten it up a little bit. So that's that piece number 4. It's one of the more difficult pieces on the kit to get in, so after you get that one on, take a coffee break, and then we'll come back to the next one. Okay, I'm going to show you another piece here. It's piece number 6. It's a relatively small, little bitty palm-sized piece here that we've got bent with flanges around it. It's a fill-in piece around a electrical sensor line, but when I put it on there I can see that it's going to interfere with that sensor right in this area where the red notch is, and so I'm just going to take a tin snips and cut that, relieve that up a little bit more so that we don't touch that sensor line, or we can get this piece put in place. So I take that little bit out. I'll try and fix that on future cuts of this design, but if it doesn't fit right there, you'll have to trim to make it go. This piece goes in place right here. I don't know if you can see that. It's right behind the airline. There's a sensor that comes out of the water jacket for the exhaust gas recirculation, and we can put this in place. I'm actually going to trim a little bit more out of that, but then I'll put 3 screws here, actually 2 screws on top. It's overkill, but that one's in. We'll put that one in place. I'll show it to you once I get that done. Alright, we put that little piece on here, and we've got it screwed in place tight so that it'll hold the whole machine together. Now we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts on that, or screws in that little piece. But notice I've got clearance all around this electrical sensor. Probably put a little piece of, actually this I can leave that open. If it leaks a little air out there, it won't hurt a thing. We probably actually want to encourage a little airflow through parts anyway. I also tightened down this 13 millimeter or 8 millimeter bolt with a 13 millimeter ratchet here on top of this bracket that holds that sensor line, and that also holds our piece tightly onto the block. So everything's getting pretty rigid here now with this little bit of tin. So we'll go on to the next piece. Alright, I've got a piece number 7. I think this is the correct orientation for it. It looks symmetrical, like it wouldn't matter which way you bent things, but I think it is. Notice it's slanted a little bit off to that direction on top here, and so there's flanges bent slightly forward or forward at an angle here, and then this slopes out, and then we got a flange on the bottom with 2 screw holes. This piece fits up behind the compressed air line here in that pocket, and then we can put the 2 screws in there, and it helps eliminate major leakage there. We had to cut through the edge of our box here in order for that airline to come down through there. So this is kind of a filler piece that will fill in that odd shaped space. So I'm going to shoot that in with a couple screws, and I'll show you what it looks like once I've screwed it on. Alright, we've screwed that piece in place. It doesn't necessarily fit tight there, but it fills in a lot of the space so that we minimize the leakage out of that. There's a screw in there, and there's a screw in the other side on the bottom, and the flanges on that kind of lay in here and help pull that together. And when we get the rest of the box pulled together, it probably will tighten up a little bit like that too. So that's piece number 6. Now we're going to look for piece number 7. We're looking at piece number 8, 008. And we've changed positions completely from where we were on the engine. We're now looking down on the top of the head. The head is here, the exhaust turbine's here, the compressor's here, the geometry for the turbo is managed by this box, and then I've got an exhaust pipe here. What we want to do is our box is going to come up from the head up this way, straight up here, and that's what this piece is going to hopefully accomplish. it has to go underneath these oil lines. These flanges on the bottom have slots in that we can bolt to some open bolt holes in the valve cover. We also have to go over the top of this wiring harness here in an oil line. So we've got a kind of pre-made flower petals cut here to go around that apparatus. And the way that you put this piece in place is to, oh, by the way, I've pre-fit this a little bit. You may want to put it on and fit and put it on and fit in case this wiring harness isn't in the same place for you. I bent these petals out. I don't care if they necessarily touch it on top just a little bit, but I really don't want any pressure on that, and I certainly don't want any sharp edges next to that wiring harness. So you might want to just give it enough bend so that you actually have some clearance around there, and we can fill in with tape again to plug it up a little bit so that we don't lose too much air there. Now if I turn this piece with the flanges on the bottom, turn it face down, and I drop down, I can pivot it. I can pivot it in place so that we actually have two slots that line up with holes there, and there's a third partial slot that may or may not catch the bolt hole that it's intended to catch there. This piece, the left end of this piece, the very left limit of it here, it's my left, it's probably your right, but the very limit of the piece here next to the turbocharger geometry actuator should, if you look down on it, it should be about flush with the face of the bolts in the compressor. I know that's a lot to pick up, but there's a series of bolts in the face of the turbocharger compressor, and this thing, in terms of how far to slide it left or right, pretty much as far left as it will go, right now for me anyway, but it will line up with the bolts in the face of that compressor. So we're going to take a minute offline and see if we can't get bolts started in those slots down there to hold this on. But if you also look down here, I'm going to take you down there, and you may or may not be able to see. Where are we losing all of our... Okay, that's that opening around the wiring harness, and you can see those flower petals. Once I have it bolted down, I may be able to bend some of those down to fit a little closer around it, but for now we'll just put it in place like it is and then address that later to tighten that hole up a little bit. We're now looking at piece number 10. You will want to have watched the video to know how to fold that baby up because it's a little bit of a puzzle. I did have to straighten out this one flange that bends on the bottom in order to put it in place, and then we'll try and bend that one back down or under when we get it mounted. This piece goes on the back face of the piece that we just mounted, the vertical. It's got 6 screw holes here. You don't necessarily need to use all 6, but they'll all be available to hold it on. And this complicated box-like thing is a way to come up against and fit inside the turbocharger geometry actuator, or whatever you call that thing, and try to keep it from being a place where we lose a whole bunch of air. So I had to trim mine here about 1/8 of an inch off of this face, or this edge, and this edge for this extension to go inside of that box and fit where it's supposed to. You may need to trim that if it doesn't fit right yourselves. I'll try and correct that on future runs of the tin, so if you get one in 2020 or later, it may be fixed. Also, there's this area where the turbocharger oil line goes through. That line goes all over the engine. I don't know why, they just go everywhere on the engine with that line before they go to the turbocharger with it. Anyway, it happens to cut through here again, so we have tabs bent there, and in this case it's probably better to bend them in to parallel that line because it dives through this location. So I bent those in, and then you'll check to make sure you've got clearance or that you're not pushing hard on that oil line with anything, and then we can try and put this piece in place. Now, all right, I've got this piece. I'm gonna fit it underneath this tab, and this drop down tab here will have to go behind over this. Well, that wasn't right. Let's do it this way. We'll drop this gap down around the oil line that dives down there, and then we slide this back, pop that over, and the whole thing will slide in against this box. Once we do that, you get it to the point where you get the screws lined up and we can put some screws in there. I apologize for the lighting, but it's nighttime here and it's raining here, so we're improvising a lot. That's 5 out of 6. I'm going to ignore the bottom one that's down near the oil line. That won't come off. And I'm going to try and put one through this top tab here, see if I can tie that together. Okay. And then I'll reach down under the bottom, and I had that piece that I had straightened out. And I'll try and bend that in a little bit to help block air loss down there. So that's down there. It's hard to see, but it's near the bottom, and I bent it back in underneath here a little bit, about 90 degrees if you can. Okay, so that's part number 10. Is that what that was? I think 10. We'll go on to part number 11 if we can find it. Alright, I've got piece number 9. This piece fits over the top of the turbocharger bearing. It slides down between the compressor and the exhaust turbine, and this fits over the top of the turbocharger bearing. I cut out about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch extra here. I'm not sure that was necessary. I was having trouble with something, but it turns out the piece was a little bit too long in the back, and so I cut off this piece, about 3/4 to an inch off of that, because it runs into this geometry control thing down there. When I did that, and I actually bent this flange a little bit out, just a little bit, it fits up over the compressor housing, and now we can slide it down in between the two, right up against the bolts of the compressor, and these two screw holes here are the larger pilots, so those stay outside of this end piece here so that we can line up those screws and put it together. The other thing on the other side you have to watch for is this sensor line that goes down to the turbo. It needs to slip inside a cut on this thing, and you can see that. It fits pretty well right now, but we've got that piece put in place. If it gets noisy in here, it's because it's raining on top of the tarp that we have over above us. Apologize for that. But we should be able to put screws through the end of this and tie the two together. I'm going to see if I can slip there. If I slip that one, if we put this piece inside underneath this one, then the holes appear to line up. Alright, that piece is in place. So that was number 9. And not sure where we're going next, but we'll look for the next piece. We'll come back to you in a minute. Alright, this piece number is numbered 5. We've passed 5, but this piece could go in almost at any point. What it's going to do is it's going to sit down on piece number 1 that we put in down there. It's going to sit. This wide flange is going to sit flat on that piece, and it's going to come up, and this curved face, this vertical face with the curve cut in it, is going to slap up against the side of the compressor and seal up that space so we don't lose a lot of air out of there. Now getting this one, ultimately this piece's tab is going to be bent around like that, but you can't get it in place with it that way, so we'll mostly straighten it out. And then to get this one to go in, we're going to kind of lay it sideways down here, slide it through on top of the wiring harness, slip it under the wiring harness, and so it has to kind of go right under this part of that boot, that rubber boot, And when we get it under there to a certain point, then we've got to kind of pull that wide flange underneath. You may actually have to bend it underneath and rotate the piece over on its side, so we can kind of spring that part and bring this up in place here. You may be bending it a little bit in the process of doing that, but the metal is ductile enough you can straighten it out once you get it in place. Now I'm bending that tab in the front, or closest to me, that we straightened out to be able to get it in there. There we go. Now we slide it in here up against the turbocharger compressor face, and then we have to kind of unbend everything that we bent in the process of doing that. So I'll reach down and try and bend that flange so that we get it. There, we got it mostly vertical here. Still got to do a little bit more. There, now I can push it in tight against the compressor, and it pretty much seals up against the curved face of that compressor. Now the holes in the bottom flange on this piece they don't have mating holes in the piece number 1 underneath, because there was no way to know exactly where this piece is going to land to do that. So these are self-drilling, self-tapping screws. We'll simply put a long driver bit in here and try and catch probably one of the holes back here. You could probably maybe hit 2 of them, and then there's one in the front you can go vertical and hit, and we'll just force them through the piece number 1 and screw it together that way. I'll go offline because I don't want to take your time for that, but I'll show it to you when I come back. Okay. Alright, I don't know if you can see down in that far. Maybe if I go from this angle, you can see there's a screw now that goes through that wide flat flange into the flat piece underneath. And if I come around this side, may not be able to see that real well, maybe at all. But I got one through in front, at the front where the air exits the compressor as well. Now I did that with this bit that you're looking at here that's about a foot long. It's a piece of electric fence rod with a square drive set into the front end of it by drilling it in, or drilling a hole and tapping that in there and epoxying it in. I'm not providing these yet with a kit, but I may give you in the future provide one with a kit. If you don't have one that long, you can use an extension and put a 4-inch or 5-inch bit into an extension, a hex extension, and that'll get you down there to do that screw. Or you may want to just take a driver bit and weld it onto the end of a rod quick, and then you've got a long bit to do that with. But it's pretty hard to reach that with anything else. So that piece is on in place up tight against the side of the compressor face. You can see it a little bit down in here. Just don't have great lighting there, but that shiny piece coming up against the curved face, the kind of donut face of that compressor. This will seal that so that we don't lose a lot of air around that. Okay, that was piece number 5, but we're going to go on to another piece now. You're now looking at the compressor and where the air exits the compressor, and we've got this piece that we put in place between the turbocharger exhaust turbine and the compressor turbine, and it has this cutout around it that goes around the oil line, which again covers every piece of square inch of the engine. They run that oil line, so it comes up now and finally goes through to the turbocharger bearing, and then there's this little sensor line, I'm not sure what it senses, but also has to go through there. So I bent the pedals of this flower out so that, again, they don't hurt that, either of those components. The next piece we're going to put in place is piece number 11, and it is got fingers cut in it here, and when it's flat it's got all these fingers and a little dip in the top here, and then we got a flange bent at 45 degrees and one bent down at the bottom. This piece, I had to bend it up a lot, and you'll need to adjust it because I don't guarantee that oil line is the same on every machine, so you'll need to fit this. and I wanted some of the fingers to go behind it or tuck behind it, and this bottom one's actually going to go over top of it. So we can slide that in along this space until the corner here lines up with the corner of the piece above it. And then there's a screw hole down here at the bottom on this flange, right down. I don't know if you can see that. I'll try and get it so you can see it. Right down low here, just to the side of the air line. Right down in here, there's one screw hole that'll line up with the pieces from the bottom, the lower pieces. And then we'll put one screw in there to hold this together for now, and then we're going to put a big panel here and it'll tie all these screw holes together. So I'm going to try and put a screw in there. Okay, I got that screw in. We may still have to twist things around just a little bit to line it up, but that's actually pretty vertical now. That looks good. So we'll go on to the next piece after that. Just be sure that you have bent these fingers so that they don't hurt that oil line in any way. They kind of find their way around it, and we're trying to minimize the air loss around that. You can also bend the bottom finger and these others so that they kind of, once they get around that oil line, that they kind of block the airflow. So I can reach in behind, bend them back around so that they block any airflow there. We'll leak air out here, and that's okay. The system needs to leak air, but we just don't want to dump a lot of air out in one spot. So this will be all right. All right, the next piece is the largest piece in the kit probably. It is number, looks like 10 or 12, I'm not sure what it is. Anyway, it's this big piece, you can't miss it. And it's really not a mystery how it goes on. It lies on the side here, and there's a whole vertical set of screw holes that tie the previous stuff that we've done together. And so if I can put a screw in, we'll start to hold that together. There's one. Right, we're looking at, this is the top surface by my finger, and I'm looking down this vertical line. I hit one place here where there's a hole or something behind there, so that screw won't bite, but that's okay. So I got a whole vertical line that holds this piece in place for right now. Now we'll have more that ties it together in a little bit, but that's piece number, I don't know if it's 10 or 12 or whatever it is, but that's that big piece. Okay, we are looking at, it's hard to see this. I've got the light low here. I'll bring it up so you can see this. Piece number 13, it's a long piece. Has a long, narrow flange that's bent down in terms of the direction that we're going to use it. This piece fits in the bottom. It's the bottom right-hand end of the kit, and it will slip in at an angle here so that this notch, the notch that you're looking at in the center of your field of view right now, fits around part of the exhaust gas cooling system on the farther to our left here. We had that first piece of bottom, and this kind of overlaps that piece. So I'm going to slip this piece in place. All right, we get it in behind this post that's in our way here, and we get it level, and then you have to tip it up to go up over. There's a tube pipe there underneath there. We'll lift it over that, so we're getting up near there. Now let's need to bring the left end in farther, slide that on, and I can bring the right end around. And it has to slide around, there's a notch in that piece, and it fits around another tube that comes up on the far side. And if we do it all correctly, It almost fits. Only it currently doesn't. Alright, we're looking at piece number 13. It's a long piece, has a narrow flange on the outer edge. It has a cutout here that has to go around an oil line. It has a cutout here that has to go around a coolant thing. I slipped it in place there about 10 times. I kept hitting on something on the block. There's something on this particular one that I have not encountered on other 9770s. When it slides in there, it bumps against the block. It's somewhere in here, and it seemed to be a moving point. If I trim it here, it would bump in a little bit farther back. The bottom line was we couldn't get this side in as far as we shoved under there all the way so that it would slip up inside the existing pieces we have to put the screw holes in here. We ended up trimming off probably about a 3/8 of an inch along about half of the length of this here. And I took a little notch out here where it seemed to be hitting something. I'm not sure that was necessary. But I ended up cutting about half the length of this, what I did in order to find that spot was to run a magic marker along this edge so that it was marked red or black or whatever. Slip the piece in place to where you can feel it hitting there, slide it back and forth a few times while pushing on it, bring it back out, and it would mark the edge where it had been rubbing and take the magic marker thing off, or the Sharpie marker off. And I did that about 4, 5, 6 times to finally get it to slide in place. So now we can go underneath here. We have to angle it up to go over that pipe or coolant line in there. Bring this end in. Slide the other end in around that line pipe that goes up there. Slide it. I have to slide it all the way to my left, and then the screw holes line up, and we can put some screws in to hold it on. Alright, so now we can put a screw on, lift this bottom piece up, that flange up inside until the hole lines up. You have to slide it all the way to the left first. There we go. Drop that screw. And lift it up inside there and slide it until I can see that. There's a screw hole. Oh, screwed into my finger. That hurt. And we'll come down to this end and see if we can catch another one. Okay, once you get 1 or 2 screws in, or a couple screws in, the rest line up. Okay, that's that piece. It was tough getting it in there. Once it's in there, the whole thing is locked in place. It really gets rigid now at the bottom, so that's helpful. So that's piece number, whatever it was, 10, 12, whatever it's, 13? It says it's 13, so 13. Okay, on to the next one. That's good. Alright, I'm looking at piece number 14. This is going to go in the end underneath the muffler. It's all bent up in shape. It turns out it's not as hard to get in as I thought it was going to be. I want to point out something else while we're doing it though. This is what I call a keyhole. We have several of those. There's some on the bottom that you may have seen before when we put that bottom piece in. We always want those punched from the inside to the outside a little bit. That's where we're going to allow air to leave the box deliberately so that some air flows through it. And we want it to distribute it around the enclosure that way. There will be other leaks, but these are deliberate ones. And so that keyhole I punched out about 1/4, 3/8 of an inch. Now I'm going to stick this. I'm going to turn you a little bit, see if you can watch this. Sorry, got to squish you around here a little bit more. And there we go. Now, you're looking at the end of the muffler over here, and the end of our tin is just short of it. I'm going to put this piece underneath the muffler, slide it into the end of the other one, and then rotate it down. And the flanges on this side of this piece fit inside of our existing wall of tin here. So we're going to shoot screws through and catch this piece. Okay. Now the question is, how do I hold it in place while I put a screw through, because it wants to drop out of place. I'm going to get a screw and then I'll see if I can't do that. What do I do with the screw gun? There it is. If I can get one screw hole to line up, that will help us a lot. Nope. There's one. That'll help. Then we get a second one in place and everything else starts to line up. Dropped another screw. Alright, that's all the screws on this side of that piece. It closes this up this angle right above. There's an electrical fitting underneath there. It goes up there, goes up the side, up, and then we've got a flat to go underneath the muffler, and we got another piece to do that. It'll wrap around here and another piece from on top. So we'll do those pieces next. Next piece to go on is 15. It has a cutout for the exhaust pipe that goes into the muffler. It's got flanges all around here, and it slides up from below, and it should wrap around both this side and the far side so that the flanges overlap. And we got it in place there. If I can get a screw, we got it locked in. One. Okay, there will be a matching set of 4 screws on the opposite side panel on the other end of towards the other end of the muffler. I won't necessarily haul you around there to show it, but you got 4 screws to put in on the other side, but it should all be in place now, so that'll be easy, hopefully. While we're at it, let's see whether we can fit the next piece. 16 is going to be a similar piece, but it's going to come down from on top. That's looking pretty good. I think we're going to put some screws in that and hold it in place as well. Two pieces have a flange that overlaps on the end, and there are screw holes, but there's no way for you to get them. It's too close to the muffler, so don't even worry about those. There will be 2 screws on the opposite side of this in the flange to put in as well, on the other side of the piece, other side of the whole box. So you put those screws in to hold it together on that side. That's enough for that piece. Okay, we're looking at the end here. I got the muffler there, this wall that we just built, or this box we just built around there. One thing I'll try and point out if I can is I got some screws to put in underneath here. Yeah, there's a series across here that go vertically upward, and so I'll reach under with a screwdriver or a drill driver and throw those in. That leads us to the last piece. We're now looking down into the box on the exhaust pipes, the turbocharger, and so this is the upper part that encloses those. The lower part got the exhaust manifold and enclosed that. So now we have everything that's hopefully hot enough to cause ignition of dust. Generally, as the gas enters the muffler, it cools down enough so that we don't have that problem there. But now we've got one piece left to put on here. It's a very simple one. I'm happy to be to this point. It just fits over the top of this, and you start in one corner and start putting screws in and just walk all the way around, and every time you put another screw in, the next hole will probably line up for you. So we screw down the top of this, and we got the box, the enclosure part, finished. Then we have to worry about how to get air in here and how to mount the pan and the filter and connect the hydraulics. But this will be the last step in installing the tin work on a John Deere 9770. This is an early, I think, 9770. Had some little variations compared to some of that I've had. And we tried to show you where you might have to butcher the tin a little bit in order to make it fit. Anytime you get an interference, you want to figure out what that interference is. If you're just bumping into something, or if there's and you have to fit around it, or if there's actually a place where you might have to cut to make the material fit. We try to make it as accurate as possible, but the combines change over time and they make small changes, and they certainly don't publish those changes so that we know exactly what they did for little things. So we'll get this last piece put on, and then we'll be done with the tin enclosure, and then we'll move on to the fan, filter, and hydraulics later.